Greetings everyone, Francis Fernando here. Hashtag how much will I make? My mantra when it comes to investing in real estate. Why? Here's why. You take your hard-earned money, you take your hard-earned time, and you park it into a real estate investment with the hopes that you will draw a return on investment. And if that's the case, then should that number not be calculatable, if there is such a word? Should you not know exactly how much you are going to make on that real estate investment? And if you don't know it, and if you're not going to make money, then my question is, why even get involved? Get involved, park your time where you're going to get a return on investment. Life is short, folks. So with that, today's episode is super exciting. It is part 2 on how to buy a foreclosure and REO asset. Again, part 2 on how to buy a foreclosure and REO asset. So if you recall, in part 1, we covered the mechanics. I love mechanics, by the way. Side note, I love mechanics. The mechanics on how a property becomes a foreclosure. What's the path? What happens? How does an otherwise stable piece of real estate where there is an owner or an investor that owns it, that is paying the mortgage, and maybe something happens in life. I called it the 3 Ds of distressed real estate. Death, divorce, desperation. So one of these 3 causes cause that asset to become unstable. The homeowner stopped paying the mortgage, or the investor stopped paying the mortgage. It became unstable. It hit a whole series of mechanics, because there's a process associated with everything. And that property now became unstable. It hit the auction market. And today we are going to talk in part 2 about how we can buy that real estate asset. How do we now, what are the mechanics at a foreclosure? How do you behave at a foreclosure? What happens at an auction? So for those of you that have not witnessed an auction, I highly recommend you do that. Find out what the next scheduled auction is in your community. Go attend it. But I'm going to talk about it today. So that's what we're going to talk about. I also want to tell you, if you're buying, there's a saying in real estate. You make money in real estate at the time of purchase. I'm going to say it again. You make money in real estate at the time of purchase. So would it not make sense, if that is a true statement, would it not make sense to buy distressed real estate and really understand the mechanics of how distressed real estate works? Because when you're buying a foreclosure or when you're buying an REO, typically you are buying them at depressed values. So you're buying it already with a profit margin built in there, if you buy it right. Hence the reason that I have created this 2-part video series. It's so that you don't fall into the snags and the traps and make a wrong purchase decision. It's to give you confidence. Ultimately, the purpose of these videos is to give you the confidence so that you can go into a foreclosure auction and know exactly what to do. So let's jump right in. I have some notes here because I do not want to miss anything here. This is a super important topic. So the first thing I want to do is sort of back up, right? So we are at the point where there is a notice of sale that has been issued by the court system authorizing a foreclosure. So the notice of sale has been issued. It is at this point that the homeowner or investor, if the homeowner is an investor, has lost his or her rights of redemption. Lost his or her rights of redemption. What that means is that no matter what happens, this foreclosure is plowing through. You could collect a whole boatload of cash as the homeowner or as the investor and bring it to the lender, and the lender is typically not going to accept those funds because they are plowing through with the foreclosure. Now, there are some nuances. There might be instances where there is a bankruptcy filing that could stop the foreclosure process, but we're not going to get into the what if scenarios. We're going to talk about the norm. The norm is that the foreclosure right after the notice of sale has been scheduled. After the notice of sale, when I say scheduled, it means that there's an auction, right? There's an auction scheduled. It's been authorized to be auctioned off. So super important here is step number one is, or not step, but what is the first thing we need to do? We need to find out where these auctions are posted. How do we know about auctions? How do we know about true auctions? So there's a couple of different ways. Typically, they are posted in the local newspaper because it is a public notice. It's a requirement that all foreclosure auctions become a public notice. So it's either on the local newspaper and or could be on the law journal, local law journal. It could be in your county courthouse. If you go to the county courthouse, depending on the county that you reside in or the county that you're interested in, they might have an area where all the foreclosures typically take place. There might be a board, a simple listing board that has all the foreclosures posted there. Those are typically harder ways to do it. The more modern and I guess more current way is that foreclosures are typically listed on websites. So you could search websites such as auction.com, you could search websites, Hubzu. There's a whole host of different online services that are sort of aggregating, collecting all these foreclosures and posting them. A little side note here and a disclaimer. I issued a disclaimer on video 1 and I want to do the same at this stage here. My disclaimer for this video, similar to video number 1 or part number 1, is that this is a local United States based video and discussion about foreclosures. The foreclosure process varies state by state, municipality by municipality, county by county. So you want to look at your local rules and regulations, the time frames, the requirements to purchase, whether you register or you don't register, all those local rules you want to look at. The second disclaimer is that I am associated with auction.com. I do have an agreement and an arrangement with them. So when I speak and I gave you the example about utilizing auction.com as a way to look at foreclosure listings, by no means am I promoting them or making any reference about that. I am simply saying that auction.com is an amazing place to look at the foreclosures because they're all listed in a one-stop shopping location. So with that, step number 1, or I shouldn't say step number 1 is, but you want to find out where these foreclosures are listed. We just talked about that. The next is actually physically going to the foreclosure auction. So for those of you that have not been to a foreclosure, here's how it happens. The public notice is going to have critical information where the foreclosure is being held, right? Typically foreclosures are held either at the property, so on site at the end of the driveway on site, or the foreclosure is held at the county courthouse, the local county courthouse. So you want to find out where it's being held. It might be held at a law office, but typically the public notice is going to give you indication as to the time, the date, the time, and the location that the foreclosure auction is going to take place. The reason why I like the online services, as long as they are real time, is that in my experience, foreclosures often get canceled, they get postponed, or there is some sort of change in time or delay. So the last thing I want you to do is, show up to an auction, take your valuable time, show up to an auction only to find out that it has been canceled, or it was held earlier, or it's just been postponed. So you want to make sure you get current timing and a current status of where we are on the auction. That's current status would be critical. Once you attend the auction, you get on site, you will see 2 critical people that are in attendance at the auction, and then you'll obviously see a host of people. Depending on how popular this property is, you might see 1 person, you might see no people. In fact, as a side note, I did buy a property at auction where there was no one. So I was the only bidder and I ended up getting a phenomenal deal. Nonetheless, There could be a lot of people, there could be no people, there could be one person, but you are going to have two critical people there. That is the auctioneer, right? Also known as the referee, right? So the auctioneer or the referee. Sometimes that auctioneer or referee, on most instances, is either an auction firm that has been hired to conduct the auction, or is a local attorney that has been given the jurisdiction to conduct the auction. And the second person that's going to be there is the bank representative. This is the person who is looking out for the best interest of the bank, protecting the bank's interests. So you want to go up to those two people. You are a professional, you've educated yourself, and you want to appear super confident. Go up to them, introduce yourself as a person who is attending the auction for the property in question. Sometimes there's multiple auctions, so you want to be very clear as to what auction you're attending, and introduce yourselves. There might be a registration requirement. Again, it depends on the municipality, location, county, state. If there is a registration requirement, you have to show your ID, you register, and you are ready to take part in the auction. What happens typically is that the auctioneer, at the exact time of the auction, he will announce the auction. He or she will then read the terms and conditions of the sale. This is a super important and hilarious step. You will read the terms and conditions of the sale. The reason it's important, the reason it's hilarious, here's the reason it's important. There is valuable information in that document that is being read that covers the conditions of sale. What are the parameters of the sale? Is this a final sale? What is covered? What is not covered? It's super important to understand and listen to each and every word being said in the terms of the sale. The reason it's hilarious is because the auctioneer will literally stand there and in certain cases read a 6 or 10 page document just word for word, because it is a legal requirement to do that, again, depending on the state, municipality, city, town that we are conducting this foreclosure. So terms and conditions will be read. It's your opportunity to ask a few questions and get clarity on it. And then at that point, the auctioneering will begin. The auctioneer will typically say, we are opening our bid at $500. Do I have anyone here interested in $1,000 or $1,500? And I have $1,000 there. Is anyone interested in $2,000? And so the bidding process will go. The bids typically open at what's called an opening bid price. That is specified by the bank. The bank will issue what's called the opening price. And then they would state what the bid increments are. So opening prices, we're going to start the auction at $500. I'm just giving you an example. $500. The bid increments are in increments of 1,000. So meaning the next bid is 1,500. If you're interested in it and there's already a bid at 1,500, your next bid is 2,500. And so it goes in increments of 1,000. But those rules and regulations will be stated at the terms and when they're reading out the terms of the sale. There is a number called the upset price or the reserve price. The bank representative, who's the second person, critical person there, will issue or will state that the bank reserve is X. So let's just give an example. The bidding starts at 500, you bid 1,000, the increments are 1,000, so the next bid is 2,000, and it may go up until 10,000, and then the bank may step in, the bank representative may step in and say, the bank's bid on this property, so the bank is protecting their position, the bank's bid is 50,000. Once they say the bank's bid is 50,000, the bank will not go above their bid. They will stop bidding at that point. From that point, it's fair game. It's fair game from that point for all the other investors. In other words, the property will not sell below the upset price, or they call it the reserve price. That's the minimum that the bank is willing to let that go. Above that is when bidding starts. Even though they may start the bidding, there is a specific reason which I won't get into, but there is a specific reason why they start the bidding below the bid price. They work it up, get everyone warmed up. The bank typically bids the reserve price, and the property, if it is going to sell, it's going to sell above the bid price. I have seen, it's actually quite often, I have seen properties sell for $1 above the bid price. So if it's a $50,000 property, an investor may say $50,001 if they approve that. If there are bid increment requirements, it might be $51,000. Nonetheless, there is a bid or reserve price. So that is typically will go on, and then once they get to the highest price, the auctioneer's job is to sort of garner more interest, and he'll say, any more interest, we're at 62,000, do I hear another bid? And he'll say going once, going twice, and at the drop of the gavel is when the property sells at the asking price, or at the bid price. If you happen to be the lucky individual that had the highest bid, you will then be sort of, called upon to fill out a bunch of paperwork. So here's, at this point, what is required is you are going to be required to have a 10% cash or money order made payable to the referee or the auctioneer. Super important to know that. Again, this is a requirement that could change based on your locality, your municipality. You want to make sure you look at the local rules and regulations. But typically, you're looking at 10% down, and you have to have that available, ready and available funds to put down on that. So you place that money down, make sure you get a receipt for that. That's super important, and you will be scheduling a closing, typically within 30 to 45 days at closing, a foreclosure closing. I want you to remember that buying a foreclosure in most instances is a cash transaction. It's a cash transaction. The reason it's a cash transaction is upon purchase of the real estate, you can't get title insurance right away because you're going to get a foreclosure deed. And so because you get a foreclosure deed, you want to make sure that you understand that you are going to need to come up with 10% down in cash or certified money order or certified funds, and then the remaining is not a financeable. It's not a financeable. You can't go and get traditional financing. You can get hard money financing. You can use your own money, and I have done separate episodes that talk about the options that you have to finance a foreclosure. But typically, it's a cash transaction. So within 30 to 45 days, you want to make sure you have your cash lined up. So that's super important. Now, here's the difference between an REO and a foreclosure. All that I discussed up until this point is a foreclosure. If you end up being the lucky person that bought the property, that is a foreclosure. You just bought a foreclosure. Or if someone else bought it, they just bought a foreclosure. Do you recall how I talked about the bank having an upset price? Well, if there is no bidder that bids above the upset price, so all the bids are below the upset price or the reserve price, then essentially what happens is the property gets sold back to the bank, or it's sometimes called reverts back to the bank. In other words, it does not sell to a third party, the bank takes it back. Once the bank takes it back, the bank is actually the owner of the property. And at this point, it is called an REO, real estate owned asset. So that is the difference between an REO and a foreclosure. This is typically what happens at a foreclosure auction. There is one more area that I want to cover with you, and this is what is known as due diligence. I want you to come into that foreclosure auction super confident. That is the purpose of this video. Here are 7 steps that I've put together that help you come to an auction super confident, a foreclosure auction. Step number 1, as soon as you have done your research, you've looked up the property, I want you to do a drive-by. Step number 1 is do a drive-by. Look at the community. You can tell a lot by just driving by, looking at the community. What is going on in that neighborhood? The property is going to be occupied, so I warn you and I urge you not to go into the property, not to knock on the property, because they are going through a distressed situation. So it is not permissible to enter the property. I would, however, recommend that you drive the neighborhood and possibly talk to some of the friendly neighbors and find out what's going on with the property. I wouldn't disclose personal information, but find out about the neighborhood. Find out about the condition of the property. Just let them know you're interested. So number one is drive-by. Number two is comparables in the region. Look at what that region is selling for. Look at what kind of employment base is there, what the factories or employment is being created. Is there employment moving in? Is there employment moving out of that community? So what is generally going on? What are the school systems like? I would also call the local, once you know the local region, I would call the local tax office, or the local buildings office first, and find out what are the tax what are the zoning or permitting issues that are going on with the building. Is there any violations from a coding standpoint? If it's a rental property, are they compliant on their housing inspection codes? If it's a single-family home, have there been permits? Has there been illegal work done? So super important. The next call that I would make, because if you're calling the county office, you would call the building department to answer all those questions. I would have them then transfer you over to the tax office and ask them if you can speak to the tax collector to find out if the taxes and water bills and sewer bills are current. The tax bills are current. I want to stress this again. You want to make sure that the tax bills are current. Here is why. Tax liens supersede mortgage liens. So if there is a tax lien on the property, in other words, if the taxes have not been paid and you purchase this property, you will be responsible for the back taxes. Super important. This is a write me downer. So you call them, make sure you get the tax lien information, and make sure that there's clear tax information. I would do a title review. Title review is call your local attorney. You can have negotiated rates with them. Call your local attorney and say, can you do a preliminary title review? See what kind of mortgage liens are on this property. I just want to make sure I'm buying a property with a clear title. And if it's not a clear title, at least you know what's going on. You could ask your attorney to give you the ABCs on how to do it yourself. I don't do it myself. I don't recommend you do. I know how to do it, but I choose to give it to a professional just because I don't want to miss something. I'm not reading it like an attorney would read it. Number 4 is make sure that you do some analysis. What is your scope of work on this? If you can't get interior access, I would assume the worst. I would assume that you're doing a complete rehab on the interior. What's going on the exterior? Do your scope of work. Run your numbers. You know, I talk a lot about pro forma or property analysis tool. I've created my own property analysis tool. Feel free to reach out and connect with me if you want your own personalized copy of a property analysis tool. I've done it for buy and holds, and I've done it for flip real estate. So if you're looking for a scope of work, reach out to me. I'll be more than willing to share that with you. But make sure you know your numbers. Included in knowing your numbers is also knowing what your finance costs are. Earlier on, I talked about these are not, foreclosures are not financeable through the traditional channels. In other words, you can't go to your local bank and get a financing directly for buying a foreclosure unless you do some sort of creative financing. Typically, it's going to be either your personal money or it's going to be hard money. Well, if it's hard money, calculate and factor in that cost of borrowing money. What is the cost of borrowing it? What is the holding cost? All the related number crunching. So analysis, have your analysis done. Number 5 is attend open houses. You know, call a local real estate agent, look for open houses, preferably on the same street, but within the community is fine. Attend those. Look at what kind of upgrades are being done on the properties. And then you can then do a cross-functional view of, all right, here's what they are putting into the property versus the price that they're asking, and then come up with a scope of work and how you are going to price it, if it makes sense, what kind of upgrades you're going to do. Step number 6 is zoning violations. I would call the zoning office, find out if there are any lot line, plot line discrepancies, if there's any kind of issues with the city going down and maybe placing new new sewer systems that's going to rip up half of your land area. Just figure out what is going on from a zoning perspective. And finally, step number 7 is call your insurance agent, because as soon as that gavel goes down and that property becomes yours, you want to make sure that there's insurance coverage. So I would have your insurance agent drive by, let him or her know that it's a distressed piece of real estate that you're buying. It's a foreclosure, and you want to make sure that there's coverage, and they can probably do some backtracking to see what kind of claims were on the building so that you can get an idea of the condition. If there were back claims for foundation issues, you might know that it might clue you into the fact that there are foundation issues in that building as well. So those are the 7 steps to due diligence. I know this video has been sort of in depth, and this is the power of having it on video. You can go back and look at a lot of different things. I know I've spoken a lot and given you a lot of information, but my sole intent is to just give you everything, have you watch this video multiple times, reach out to me for clarification, but ultimately I want you to have the confidence to buy foreclosures at depressed values, because you're going to go into a deal with a delta, a profit margin delta. So I appreciate you taking the time. Reach out to me, connect with me, and remember, due diligence when you're buying your foreclosure or REO asset. Take care.